Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great pleasure to welcome you to the German Offshore-Wind Initiative Summit today. We are honored to have invited government officials, leaders of the industry to share valuable insights on important agenda that has effect reaching across multiple industries. The summit today will take place in two sections. The morning section will be addressing how to embrace RE100 with offshore wind. And the afternoon, we will be focused on how to build and strengthen local offshore wind industry chain. Before we start the actual agenda, I would like to sincerely invite a few guests of honor for opening remarks. Firstly, member of the Executive Board of German Foundation Offshore Wind Energy, Dr. Martin Skiba. Since Dr. Skiba is in Germany, he has kindly pre-recorded his message for us.
Li Hong, dear Vice Minister Wen Cheng-tseng, dear Dr. Wen Ye-ko, dear Ms. Traub-Evans, dear speakers and guests. As a board member of the German Offshore-Wind Foundation, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this great event organized by the German Offshore-Wind Initiative, a project powered by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. On behalf of the German Offshore-Wind Foundation, I would like to congratulate Taiwan for all the efforts in green energy, especially for the development of offshore wind. It is a very exciting period for offshore wind in Taiwan, as the Round 3 auction is active now. I can remember to sit in the office of Mr. Wen Cheng-tseng 3 years ago in 2019, when we discussed about experiences and best practices in Germany, the appropriate level of feed-in tariff for the first projects in Taiwan, which was strongly discussed at this time, and of course the plans in Taiwan to expand the use of offshore wind. I was deeply impressed by the will to introduce the use of offshore wind in Taiwan and to make it a significant pillar of the power supply. And today we see already the first results. The first offshore wind farms in operation and under construction. As Taiwan is a key partner in global supply chain in many industries, such as semiconductor, ICT, and other critical components or products, and the international requirements for carbon-neutral usage of green energy and achieving RE100 at destination markets are being enforced, the development of offshore wind has become an important aspect in the green energy structure for Taiwan. Offshore wind, compared with other green energy options, can supply stable, safe, domestic, clean energy for Taiwan, which becomes more and more important in these days. Having said this, the German Offshore Wind Initiative offers a platform for an exchange between German and Taiwanese companies, sharing lessons learned and best practices, identifying strengths and weaknesses in the supply chain, and strengthening bilateral relationships to make offshore wind in Taiwan a big success. It is exciting that we have invited so many industry leaders and experts this morning, sharing their expertise and insights, discussing how offshore wind can play a part in RE100. Thank you very much for your time and your patience. I wish you now a very interesting and lively debate.
Thank you, Dr. Skiba. And now, I would like to sincerely invite the Deputy Director General of the German Institute Taipei, Dagmar Traub-Evans, on stage for her opening remarks. Please join me to welcome Deputy Director General, Ms. Traub-Evans.
Dear Vice Minister Wen Chen, dear business representatives and all guests. Wind, solar and hydropower are the way forward to collaborate with nature. Wind power is one of the fastest growing renewable energy technology. Usage is on the rise worldwide, in part because costs are falling, but also because wind turbine capacity has increased over time. In 1985, typical turbines had a rated capacity of 0.05 megawatts. Today, wind power projects have turbine capacities of about 2 megawatts onshore and 3 to 5 megawatts offshore. 80% of the German electricity use in 2030 should become renewable. This is a very ambitious climate target, and to reach it, the solar, onshore and offshore wind sector would all have to speed up their expansion. In 2020, Germany had almost 7.8 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity feeding into the grid. Future projects are expected to increase the capacity to 10.8 gigawatt in 2025. So for Germany, offshore wind renewable energy is key to the green transition. The same can be said about Taiwan, which also has ambitious plans for its energy transition and has originally set a target of sourcing 20% of electricity from renewables by 2025. Although solar energy has the biggest share, offshore wind capacity plays an important role as well and should reach a capacity of 20.8 gigawatt by 2035. However, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted constructions of the wind power industry worldwide and also here in Taiwan. The dispatch of construction crafts was limited and deliveries of key components was delayed. Tight border controls in response to the pandemic affected the arrivals of foreign technicians, delaying the progress of wind farms. Therefore, 2022 is a crucial year for the advancement of offshore wind farms. Taiwan and Germany have enjoyed an excellent cooperation in various fields during the last decades, sharing the same value and spirit. We also face some of the same challenges, amongst others, generating enough green energy for a successful energy transition. The Taiwan-Germany Offshore Wind Summit is therefore a great opportunity to intensify our bilateral relations in the offshore wind sector. I wish all present a successful day filled with networking, exchange of ideas, and potential future collaborations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Director General, for your opening remarks. Please return to your seat. Next, I would like to sincerely invite the Vice Minister of Ministry of Economic Affairs, Wen Shenzhen, for his opening remarks. Please join me to welcome the Vice Minister.
德国在台协会我们的桃副代表，还有我们台北市政府的周台组总监，在座各位很多的风电的开发商，还有一些学界的学者们，大家早安，大家好。今天早上非常荣幸能够代表经济部来参加我们台湾跟德国的离岸风电对谈。那我想离岸风电在台湾走向2050净零碳排里面，它对于一个无碳能源、零碳能源的供应，将会扮演最重要的角色。因为我们知道说，离岸风电，因为台湾的风场状况非常的好，所以离岸风电的容量因素非常的高。那它在海域上面发展，尤其台湾海峡上面，包含水深以及我们的风速、风况。 事实上是一个非常非常珍贵的资源。那除此之外，我们大约也都知道，就是说，离岸风电其实2025年竞标的风场已经陆陆续续都有接洽到国内的需求者，那风场也都已经有买家。那在这样子的状况下，我们其实看到离岸风电的每度电发电成本，事实上 相对来说有非常大的竞争力。在台湾要走向2050净零碳排，我觉得离岸风电将会是政府持续大力推动一个重要的项目，而这里面有几个重要的工作我们会持续推动。台湾现在有4个风场在海上同时在施工，我想有关心现在整个离岸风场施工状况的应该都知道，好，云林、彰化、苗栗都有风场在施工。台湾当然我们的 infrastructure 就是我们的基础建设会持续做更多的投资，让更多的工作面可以同时展开来工作，让我们离岸风电的建设速度能够加快。2019年，台湾并网的离岸风电的装置容量大概是128个 megawatt，2021年就去年底再增加了109个 megawatt， 大将近110个 megawatt。但在今年，我们陆陆续续，刚刚我提到的4个风场陆陆续续会完成并网，或者是在明年初，明年上半年会并网的装置容量加起来，我们有机会达到2个 gigawatt， 就是我们会看到它的成长速度会非常之快，会非常的快。它在后续陆续接下来的几年内，在2025年，我们希望并网的容量能够超过5个 gigawatt， 所以我们会看到它的整个装置容量成长的速度是相对变快的，那它发电的度数也会增加。那在这样子的趋势之下，其实我们要增加工作面，增加我们的整个离岸风场开发的速度之外，接下来我们就要面对新的问题。我们怎么样的有效的利用我们的海洋空间，大自然带给我们的风，我们能够最有效的运用，包括风机的设计。我们知道方向是朝向大型化，大型化的风机除了成本上的考量以外，因为它的位置比较高，风况相对也会比较好，这是人类科技进步所带来的成果，这是第一个部分。第二个部分就是我们要面对到的第2个挑战，就是水深会越来越深。那水深越来越深，可能就要有新的风机形式，包含我们讲的浮式的风机，这也是接下来政府会去努力鼓励实验跟推动的一些项目。总而言之，在台湾未来走向净零碳排的路上，离岸风电这项再生能源的发电的量会占我们总发电度数的百分比，以目前的技术跟成本来看，绝对是最重要的一个项目。但与此同时，政府也会去开发新的一些项目。我想在座很多国外的代表也都会关心，包含海洋的能源以及地热。当然，这些我们都会持续来做发展。那最后一个最重要的工作，就是所有的再生能源最后都会面对到要并网的需求。坦白说，台湾的面积其实不大，但我们的并网需求会比过去大非常的多，就是我们的电网建设的容量会增加非常的多。因为我们都知道，就是说，你如果是一部传统的火力机组，它那一条线，它1年的使用率是超过80%，但是离岸风电如果是光电的话，可能15%，风电最好40%，所以它的装置容量的，它的电缆电网使用率相对来讲就会比较低。反过来说，我们要有这么多的电力的供应，我们的电网投资就会更增加，而电网韧性的建立会是政府跟台电公司现在非常重要的工作。我知道各位的一个跑不掉的合作伙伴叫做台湾电力公司。那我现在又身兼这个角色，我要顺便在这个地方跟大家说，台电公司依然会扮演好我们接受大家并网的角色，同时我们也希望在这个新的过程里面，再生能源不断增加的过程里面，能够让我们的电网更具韧性， 更具未来性，能够迎接一个新的能源时代的来临。这些工作我们会努力做，但我也需要在座的伙伴跟我们一起努力，一起打拼。谢谢。
Thank you, Vice Minister. Please return to your seat. We have one more guest to give us an opening remark. I would like to sincerely invite the Commissioner of the Department and Mayor's Office for External Affairs, Taipei City Government, Ambassador Tom Cho on stage for his opening remarks. Please join me to welcome Ambassador Cho.
Mr. Zheng Wenshen, Deputy Minister of Economic Affairs, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. On behalf of Mayor Kerr of Taipei City Government, it is indeed my great privilege to attend such an important green power event here in Taipei. In the past 10 years, I think everyone has felt that extreme climate has brought major natural disaster around the world. The cause of extreme climate is related to the increase in global temperatures caused by massive carbon emissions. As a result, reducing carbon emissions has become a global consensus to address extreme climate. In comparison to other continents, Europe has done the best job of reducing carbon emission by replacing fossil fuel with green energy. And Germany has done an excellent job in this regard, in particular, wind power. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you what Taipei's progress in achieving its goal of 2050 net zero carbon emissions. According to our survey, nearly 3/4 of Taipei's carbon emissions come from buildings, and about 21% come from transportation. Therefore, Taipei's policy to reduce carbon emissions focuses on these two areas. Green building policy, when the Taipei City Government builds social housing or public facilities, it incorporates the concept of green buildings and smart technology to reduce carbon emissions. In the same time, the Taipei City Government also provides incentive to encourage private sectors to do the same thing. Moreover, starting this year, Taipei City Government will renovate 3% of its public buildings annually until 2050 to further reduce carbon emissions. In terms of green transportation policy, the Taipei City Government encouraged citizens to take public transportation such as metro, buses, U-bike, and share motors to reduce the use of private vehicles. Moreover, it plans to convert all 3,500 plus petrol-driven buses to e-buses by 2030. Just for your information, there will be a total of 400 e-buses will run around in Taipei this year. Achievement, in 2005, the annual carbon emissions per person in Taipei was 5 tons. By 2020, that means 15 years later, it dropped to 4.3 tons. That means we have 13% less than 15 years ago. Taipei is now drafting a law to incorporate pragmatic goal to reduce 30% carbon emission by 2030 and net zero by 2050. In 2014, the air pollution index PM 2.5 was 19.6. By last year, the level dropped to 11.8%. After 8 years, we are working very hard to achieve the goal of dropping the index to 10, in line with the WHO standards before 2030. Since the 26th UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow has developed carbon market norm, the EU has also agreed to implement a carbon border tax policy. The net zero carbon emission is not only an environmental issue, but an economic one. Taipei will do its best to implement the 2050 net zero carbon emission goal. In addition to contributing to environmental protections, it also helps to enhance the competitiveness of our industry here in Taipei. Finally, I wish the summit a great success and all the participants have a good time here in Taipei. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Cho. Please return to your seat. And now it's time for our group photo. Staff members, please help prepare the stage. 请现场工作人员帮我们为大合照做准备。I would like to request the following guests to be on the stage for our group photo. Our first guest is the representative of German Offshore-Wind Initiative in Taiwan, Mr. David Chiang. The Vice Minister of Ministry of Economic Affairs, Wen Shenzhen. Deputy Director General of the German Institute Taipei, Dagmar Taub-Evans. Commissioner of the Department and Mayor's Office for External Affairs, Taipei City Government, Ambassador Tom Cho. Country Manager of RWE Renewables Taiwan, Mr. Yu Fengchong. Editorial Division, ESG Managing Editor of Business Weekly, Ms. Wu Yuanguan. Chief Financial Officer of Allianz, Dr. Oliver Wogemuth. Senior Vice President of E.SUN Bank, Jason Chu. Head of New Markets, APAC of Siemens Gamesa, Mr. Gierho Tschirschke. Managing Director and of Counsel, Financial Services of PWC Taiwan, Eric Xinhong Lin. 请现场的摄影师和媒体就定位，我们即将进行大合照。Is everyone ready? Don't forget to take off your masks. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Let's also take a picture with our right thumb up. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you very much. Please return to your seats, and we will now begin with the program. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure to invite our first keynote speaker, Editorial Division, ESG Managing Editor of the Business Weekly Group. Please join me to welcome Ms. Wu Yuanguan.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm the ESG editor of Business Weekly, 管务员. You can call me Flora. I'm very happy to be here to have the opportunity to participate in this forum. Last December, my colleague Wu Hemao shared that Taiwan companies have changed from a little knowledge of the wind power industry to a very enthusiastic discussion of this industry in the past 3 years, because they are eager for renewable electricity. A few months later, now, they are even more hungry for the renewable electricity. Why did I say that? Oh, okay. Yeah. Last year, Business Weekly reported very frequently on carbon reduction issues. We also conduct a ranking. We selected the top 100 with better carbon reduction performance. With the heavy pressure to reduce carbon, technology, manufacturing, and heavy industry and textile industry. They need to transform from a high carbon emission to low carbon or even zero carbon. In the process, however, not only they have to do to be transformed, there are so many new industries are also born, such as the green energy industry, new energy retailers, and new startups. They all addressing ESG issues. I believe everyone knows that Taiwan has set a goal of reaching 20% renewable energy by 2025. Just like Vice Minister Zeng Wenshen also told the Business Weekly that he predicts that by 2040, Taiwan's renewable energy will account for more than 50% of power generation. The most important renewable energy is solar and wind, of course. According to the government's plan, the proportion of the solar generation will reach 20 gigawatt in 2025, a 3 times increase from 2020. The wind maybe reached 5.6 gigawatt in 2025. It's a 44 times increase from 2020. After 2026 to 2035, the offshore wind installation capacity will increase by 1.5 gigawatt per year. This number maybe seem like a lot, but it's really enough for Taiwan companies. Business Weekly has interviewed many companies, and they all tell us they are still very worried about they can buy any renewable electricity. According to research by the Zhonghua Institution for Economic Research, Taiwan's renewable electricity generation should have been enough to meet the direct RE100 members' demand in 2019, but not including their supplier, yeah. At least 40% RE100 members worldwide relied on Taiwan supplier to help them in their goal of using 100% renewable electricity. So you can see in the beginning, you can, guys, you can look the left chart. In the beginning, RE100 across the industries had a gap in their demand for renewable electricity. For example, you can see the left one, including the ICT industry, consumer discretionary. However, when TSMC joined them, it can be seen that the proportion of green electricity demand in very industry has a big change, right? the green, because TSMC joined them, so the information, ICT industry, their demand is so big. The annual electricity consumption of TSMC is about 16 billion kilowatt hours, which is equivalent to 90% of the electricity consumption in Taipei City in 1 year. So, according to TSMC's report, last year, their electricity consumption accounted for 9% of renewable electricity. It means they need at least 440 megawatts offshore wind to supplement to achieve this goal. But last year, the offshore wind installation capacity completed in Taiwan is only 237 megawatts. So, if TSMC want to reach RE100, you can calculate how many offshore wind turbines are needed to achieve the goal. Moreover, there are 15 companies, including TSMC, in Taiwan are RE100 members. So their supply chain in Taiwan has maybe at least 1,000 companies. They all need green electricity. So last year, when Business Weekly held a carbon reduction forum, there are maybe at least 3,000 people online to participate. After the forum, the most questions they always ask us are how to join RE100 and how to buy a green electricity. While they so care. Okay, green electricity can help them reduce carbon in addition to meeting their clients' requirements. The carbon reduction may be like a bank will also look at whether a company has reduced carbon emission as a condition for financing. Therefore, in May, we and the ECCT will co-host the Renewable Procurement Summit. We will discuss how companies can obtain green and electricity at reasonable prices. Many SME wants to go group or pre-purchase electricity directly from offshore wind operators. So today, here are many wind power operators, and I'm sure you will be their solution. So thank you for listening. In the future, Business Weekly will continue to report on the issue of the energy transition and the development of wind power industry. So if you're interested, please scan the QR code and follow us. So if you have any suggestion or any question, please contact me by email, and my email is below. Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Kwan. Please return to your seat. Next, I would like to invite the Senior Vice President of E.SUN Bank on stage. Please join me to welcome Mr. Jason Chu.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason Chu, and I'm the head of the Green Finance Department of the E.SUN Financial Holding. Today, it's my pleasure to come here to share with the topic of the offshore wind finance in Taiwan with you. In response to the RE100 requirements, I think more and more influential companies, they just have committed to use 100% renewable energy, including ourselves. For Taiwanese government, I think the policy to develop the offshore wind is very important for our long-term energy development strategies. But To develop the offshore wind, it requires a huge capital, especially for the developers. So I think that the banks play very important roles in this industry to offer enough funding to the developers. So today I would like to explain an outlook of the offshore wind finance in Taiwan, hoping that can help you to understand this finance market more. Okay. First, I would like to have a whole picture of what E.SUN doing for the ESG. E.SUN Bank has been committed to the sustainable development since our establishment in the 1992. For reacting to our vision to become the best corporate citizen of the world, so we just set up the CSR committee. You can see that in 2021. And then we just changed it to the Sustainability Development Committee just last year for a better reviewing of our performance of the ESG performance. And to practice ESG in our daily basis, for example, we joined the Equitable Association, which adopt the risk management framework to identify managing the environmental and social risks when we are doing the project financing. And we are also the first Taiwanese financial holding granted by the SBTi for our goals of reducing our carbon emission. Our commitment is to use 100% renewable energy in 2030 and to reach the goals of the net zero carbon in 2050. E.SUN's core value, I think, is our sustainability is to combine our expertise in finance and to cooperate with our client partners to approach the goals that we can integrate the financial business with ESG to make our society and the environment better. Okay, for companies doing business in this new era, I think applying the global ESG goals is not only the standard for making their investment decision, but it's about the surviving. Because we see that the industry, they are transforming into a green supply chain. So that means stricter carbon requirements and the due diligence on the vendors will be necessary in the next stage. So banking is also, we have to comply with the international standards of the responsibility banking. And our government, we see that they just set a very ambitious goal that we will generate 20% of the electricity through renewable energy by 2025. So it also creates a green financing market for banks to join to support the development of our renewable energy industry. Okay, so talking about the supply chain of the offshore wind project, participants in the offshore wind power industry, we can just split into the 4 categories. They are the developer and the turnkey contractor, the EPC contractor, and the material supplier. Basically, as far as an offshore wind project concerned, that the developer, they have to bear all the development cost of the project. So usually they have the very financial pressures on it. Usually 25% of the project cost will come from the equity side. And the other 75%, they will go for the bank market for the financing. As estimated, in terms of the Taiwan 2025 offshore wind target of 5.6 gigawatt capacity, it is expected to create a developer project investment of above $1 trillion. That means the 75% of this amount will go for the financing market. So it's a big amount and a great opportunity for our banking to join. Okay, just talking about the project risk, because the construction is in or on the sea, so the risk is higher than normal on the land power plant construction. Because this is the industry and the lending structure is brand new for all the traditional commercial bank in Taiwan. So sometimes some banks, they don't have the ability to identify the risks of this kind of project risk. The major project risk we think is from the construction risk, especially from interface risk, because they have to coordinate with between different contractors to make sure that there's no delay of the project. And the project overrun is also a fatal risk for the project. So usually the banks, we need to go for a third-party opinions like the technical and insurance advisors' opinion to make sure that the risk is under control and the contract and the construction developers, they can control all the process of this construction. Okay, here's the credential that E.SUN just participated in the 5 major offshore wind finance in the Taiwanese market. Basically, from 2018 to 2021, this was a peak of construction of our Taiwan's offshore wind farm. And we joined the 5 of the 6 major financing in the market, such as the Yunnan case and the Formosa 2 and the CIP's Chongfang Xidao case. We are all of the mandated lead arranger of that transactions. And I would like to basically in the Yunnan case, we are one of the local FAs, and it's our honor to work with several multinational banks, and we also won the prize from the PFI and the asset awards of the best long syndication of green finance of that year. Okay, during the project finance experience, we found that there are many offshore, many foreign banks and the ECAs, they are interested in Taiwanese offshore financing market. We think the major reason is that we got a stable long-term policy to develop the offshore wind. And then we got a very stable PPA signed by our Taipower for such a long term to protect the long-term revenue of the project itself. So basically, based on the 5 major project finance we just participated in, we can make the conclusion that the major developers, they are from the international sponsors. And they also brought their like European or the other international relationship banks to come to Taiwan to join this financing. So you can see that the foreign banks, their participation portion just accounting for a large percentage, above 70% of the loan size. And we see more and more ECA, the export credit agency, they would like to come to join this market, majorly from the European ECAs. So we think that ECA agencies, especially the European ECAs, they have been a very good partner for our Taiwanese bank to join this developer in the offshore wind. Okay, here is the elements for assets for offshore wind finance. We think that basically internally you have to get fully involved to know all the industries know-how and the project risks of the project finance. And then you have to set up a professional team like the PF team. They have to deal with the intensive due diligence process from legal, technical, and insurance, and the financial 4 major aspects. We think that the external environment of favorable regulatory framework is also very important to support the long-term development of the offshore wind, since we need the reliable PPA price region. And we will suggest that maybe our government can consider to reduce the risk-weighted asset which we calculations in our first one, tier 1 capital for the banks to encourage more banks who would like to join this financing. Okay, that's part is our value. So following the Green Finance Action Plan just announced by our FSC, E.SUN has been supporting in green financing for above 800 solar power plants and 8 major offshore wind plants in the globe. So we just financing for above 1 gigawatt capacity of the solar project and the other 4 gigawatt capacity of the onshore and offshore wind projects. E.SUN has been selected to listed on the DJSI index for the 7th consecutive year. And our environmental contribution of the green financing, which can reduce the carbon emissions per year of 73,000 tons and equivalent to planting the 8.8 million trees in the world. So in the future, I think E.SUN will also cooperate with our clients, partners via our ESG practices in our business to make our environment and social better. Above is our presentation today, and thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Please return to your seat. Next, I would like to invite the Country Manager of RWE Renewables Taiwan, Mr. Yufeng Chong, on stage. Please join me to welcome Mr. Chong.
Hello. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I'm going to talk about our view of the Taiwan energy market. What I'm going to do firstly, for those of you who don't know us, is spend a few slides introducing RWE before moving on to where we see the Taiwan energy market, where we see the offshore wind market here going. RWE is Germany's largest electricity company and one of the largest in Europe and worldwide. We have been producing electricity for 124 years now, starting with coal, gas, nuclear, and now moving to renewables. We have been at the heart of the energy transition in Europe, and we have targets to become carbon neutral by 2040. In order to do this, we are shifting our entire portfolio. We are denuclearizing. We are closing our coal assets and shifting to investing in offshore wind, onshore solar, batteries, hydrogen, green technologies. And for this, we're putting 50 billion euros aside to invest in the next decade. So that's in US dollars, that's 60 billion US dollars to invest in green technologies going forwards. We're worldwide. We're in over 30 countries across the world, and at the heart of shifting the energy systems to a low-carbon economy. In Taiwan, we set up 4 years ago, and we have a cluster of offshore wind development projects off the coasts of Hsinchu, Taichung, and Changhua. And we're also investing in next-generation low-carbon technologies. Vice Minister Sun just now mentioned floating. We see this as being essential for Taiwan and hitting its renewable energy targets. We're also investing in hydrogen. So far, we're involved in over 30 projects worldwide. And hydrogen's really important here because, as I put in green, it opens up opportunities to decarbonize areas which are not electrified. This is particularly important for industrial sectors, many of which don't use electricity. But I'll move on to this later on in the slide. So these have already been mentioned by some of my earlier speakers. So there's the chart, it was all shown earlier. Taiwan is moving to denuclearizing. And in order to do this, it's increasing the amount of renewables and gas generation. So it's trying to shift from a high carbon electricity environment to a low carbon one. And also, it is trying to reduce its carbon emissions. Last year, President Taiwan unveiled an ambition for Taiwan to become carbon neutral. And this is, all of these ambitions, all these targets are driving interest in Taiwan's energy sector. The reason why, a few years ago, if you were in Europe and you said offshore wind outside Europe, everyone would think of Taiwan. Why? It's because of these targets from the government, from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act in 2015, the Electricity Re-Amendment Act in 2017, the Renewable Energy Development Act in 2019. All of this supporting legislation, all of these targets shows that Taiwan is committed on its journey to reduce its carbon emissions, to go towards renewables and join the global industry in this global trend. But taking a step back, so let's move out of Taiwan. So what's happening worldwide? And it's already been mentioned in my earlier speakers, if this thing works. All right, firstly, so one headline from last year, Apple publicly stated they wanted all of their supply chain to be 100% renewables. So we've mentioned this has huge implications throughout the supply chain, not just from the tier ones such as TSMC, but the companies which feed them and the companies which feed them. They all need renewable energy. And today's all about embracing decarbonisation with RWE100. So these are companies who have dedicated and committed to become carbon neutral by 2040. And there's a great statistic which was mentioned earlier by Ms. Guan, if it comes up. This is fun. So yeah, 38% of RE100 members will depend on Taiwan to receive 100% renewable electricity for their global operations. So this is why all eyes are on Taiwan. Last year, in the last couple of years, due to COVID restrictions, everyone was looking at Taiwan in terms of the supply of semiconductors. It is key, but also in terms, because Taiwan supplies 60% of the world's semiconductors from TSMC, and if this supply chain needs to go green, if it needs to go renewables, then it's really important, it's fundamental for the supply chain here to be able to source this green electricity. And what's enabling this? Well, two things. Firstly, actually, the Renewable Energy Development Act of 2019 introduced a new mechanism, a new tool called the Taiwan Renewable Energy Certificate, the TREC. And this can now be traded and can prove to companies that that their electricity supply has been completely renewables. And so it's been in the headlines. There are big corporate PPAs being signed where companies can now not only get their electricity from TPC, but from renewable energy developers. So, in terms of the targets, we saw 20% renewables. So what does this mean? Well, it's already been mentioned. Solar is going to be leading the charge for up to 2025. But what after 2025? What's next? Well, in phase 3 for offshore wind, it's been given a target of an extra 15 gigawatts over the subsequent decade. So this is 5 gigawatts plus an extra 15. That's a total of over 20 gigawatts of offshore wind. But what's 20 gigawatts? To put it in terms such as nuclear power plants, 20 gigawatts is equivalent to 12 nuclear power plants. This is a lot of electricity, and this is what's required in order to supply the needs of Taiwan. So yeah, offshore wind is going to play a critical and important role for meeting Taiwan's renewable energy targets. Here we go. So I think the key thing is, why offshore wind? Why is everyone looking towards offshore wind? Not just in Taiwan, but worldwide. I think the first thing, it's zero carbon energy. That's what everyone wants. Secondly, it's large-scale generation. It's instead of being in the tens or hundreds of megawatts, offshore wind developments are now looking to be in the gigawatt capacities. That's thousands of megawatts. So this is previously only coal and nuclear power plants could produce this scale. And this is really important in the massive transition from fossil fuel-based electricity generation moving on to low carbon generation. And importantly as well, costs. Costs have been coming down massively. The offshore wind industry started 20 years ago, and we've seen the costs coming down to a point where, after decades of investment in Europe, we see they're actually cost competitive and subsidy-free. So, but not everyone can do wind. I mean, it needs, firstly, strong wind. It also needs shallow waters. So actually, offshore wind is limited to certain areas. In Europe, you can see Europe's blessed with the North Sea, which is all relatively shallow. And in the Asia-Pacific region, you can see there's massive opportunity for offshore wind, which is why we see countries such as Taiwan, Korea, Japan chasing offshore wind. The last time I was here was a month ago when I was giving a presentation, and someone asked me, so why are the wind conditions in Taiwan so strong? So on that day, I had a look at the Windy app, and I actually saw, this was from a month ago. It shows that why offshore wind is so strong here. I mean, everyone in Taiwan knows the Dongbeifeng. So that chant comes from the northeast, and because of the geography of Taiwan, because of the mountains, it channels the wind through the Taiwan Strait. So this makes ideal conditions for offshore wind. That combined together the not so deep waters on the west coast means that, which is the reason why offshore wind developers have all flocked to Taiwan. So this is a map which many of you may have seen from the Bureau of Energy and Eatery. So it shows the strong winds off the northwest coast of Taiwan. It also shows where the 50-meter water limit is here. So beyond this, outside of that dark blue line, it gets deep. So far, all the offshore wind developments have been focused in the Changhua area. Now, traditionally, offshore wind has needed three key things. It's needed strong winds, it's needed shallow waters, and also proximity to demand. This is because you don't want to install thousands and thousands of kilometers of transmission cables. It isn't worth it. But as Vice Minister Sun mentioned, we're moving to deeper waters, and there are new technologies floating. This unlocks previously untapped areas and increases the potential for offshore wind, for renewables to supply and feed into the grid. And also great for Taiwan, if it allows developers to look at areas which are closer towards areas of high demand, towards Hsinchu, where all the semiconductors are made. And this actually helps towards grid stability, where you have less, where demand can be close to supply. So for those of you who don't know what floating offshore wind looks like, here are some pictures. This is not a new technology. It's from the oil and gas sector using proven technology. It's been used for decades. The only difference now is instead of having your offshore oil rig on top of it or hundreds of workers, you now have a wind turbine instead. And so far, there are already over 10 different floating wind projects which have been successfully deployed on operation worldwide. So this technology is now. The current challenge is bringing down the costs. So the race has begun here, if this clicker works. Okay. So countries around the world, South Korea, Japan, Europe, they're all setting targets. They're all seeing floating wind playing a key role in their renewable energy targets. And in Taiwan as well, it's great to see Vice Minister Sun saying, yeah, they see floating to be part of the picture here as well. In terms of how to deploy, what we would like to see from a developer angle is similar to what was done for bottom-fixed offshore wind demonstrator projects, 100 megawatt scale projects, such as Formosa 1, such as TPC Phase 1. And this is important because, as I mentioned earlier, it's bringing down the costs. In order to do this, single wind turbines don't bring down the costs, and you need a stepping stone. It's firstly through batch production, manufacturing 100 megawatts. You can actually do this at higher economies of scale. It also provides an important opportunity for the local supply chain to get involved because it allows them to have that stepping stone of investments and invest in factories and invest in manufacturing processes. 100 megawatts with the latest generation of turbines is around 7 units, which is a lot easier and a lot less daunting than doing a 500 megawatt project, where you need 30, 40 units of the same thing. So this stepping stone is important for proving it works, we know it works, proving the costs can come down, and also allowing the supply chain to get involved. So, last slide here. So this is how we see the future energy market, or even the energy market today. I mentioned there's offshore wind, there's floating. You can see a picture of hydrogen there as well. I mentioned these are going to play key roles in decarbonising the entire electricity supply chain. And also with hydrogen, spreading beyond the electricity supply chain into the energy supply chain as well. At RWE, we've been at the heart of the energy transition in Europe, and we look forward to playing a key role here in Taiwan too. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Please return to your seat. Next, I would like to invite Chief Financial Officer of Allianz on stage. Please join me to welcome Dr. Oliver Wolgemuth.
So thank you very much, Daja Hao. Good morning, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be here. I would like to use the next 10 minutes to talk about the role that insurance can play in the transformation of the energy market and the support that we can give to the development of wind energy. Since the focus of every insurance firm might be slightly different, please allow me to look at the topic through the lenses of Allianz Group and explain how and why wind energy matters to us. So, in essence, there are three angles. First of all, wind energy is a tremendously interesting investment opportunity for insurance firms because of the cash flow profile. Even so, many insurers have scaled back their new business offerings with hard financial long-term guarantees. There are many firms out there who have huge backbooks of that business, and wind energy in a regulated environment with guaranteed fed-in tariffs obviously provide the perfect opportunity to cover these insurance liabilities with stable and reasonably predictable income streams for many years to come. And our group is no exception in this regard. We have invested almost 7 billion euro in renewables. At this moment, we are engaged in more than 120 wind energy sites around the world, predominantly located in Europe. Next, wind energy is also facilitated by insurance. Like we have a corporate insurer that covers or provides covers for all prevalent risks throughout the life cycle of wind energy projects. So from the development stage over transport construction to the operational stage. And lastly, wind energy is also an enabler for local domestic ESG strategies. We heard that before when it comes to targets for sourcing electricity energy from renewable sources. So let me break this down, how that actually plays out for us in Taiwan. The first thing to note is that we are at the moment as Allianz Taiwan not investing in wind energy, but this is more a choice of convenience. Yes, there are specific risks that were mentioned earlier on, and there are also insurance regulation that we need to take into account, but that is not the primary reason as we are not investing in wind energy. Simply we can cover our investment needs now with a more simplistic asset universe. Unfortunately, wind energy is also no insurance business for us at the moment because we don't have a property and casualty insurer in this country. Allianz Taiwan offers only life and health insurance. But where wind energy really matters is for the domestic renewable energy targets that we have as any other Allianz entity. We want to have and achieve an RE100 target by the end of next year. So, question is, why is that important to us? Well, we can say that sustainability is truly at the heart and mind of Allianz Group, and sustainability has become part of our business strategy. And in order to implement sustainability, we follow a very comprehensive framework which distinguishes between sustainability or ESG within the organization. So this is affecting the business that we are carrying out here in this country, and ESG as a financial institution, which essentially means all the things that we are doing in our core business, being insurance and asset management. In the former pillar, we cover everything around developing ESG strategies and making sure that we have policies in place to embed sustainable principles throughout our business. It also includes all our corporate social responsibility activities. And lastly, it has this element of reducing the consumption of natural resources. And we as a company here in Taiwan, we have targets on reducing water consumption, paper, but also energy. And this is where wind energy and renewable energy comes into play. So for us, the question is how to achieve that target. In theory, as we know, there are 3 avenues. The first one is to enter into bilateral agreements with an energy producer or purchase simply a green electricity tariff from a local utility. However, these options do not exist, at least not in regards to a sleeved solution, so obtaining electricity directly from a renewable energy site. That brings us on to on-site installations, which is the second alternative. However, that is often just a partial solution because of the space that is typically available naturally on the rooftop of a building. The energy that can be produced through that space is typically insufficient to cover the electricity demand that you have in larger offices or production facilities. So that then leaves us with the purchase of renewable energy certificates. These are also an option that can be implemented fairly quickly and easily, but it may not help really the cause here if these certificates are purchased from abroad. We know that T-RECs exist, but unfortunately not in the quantities really to cover the demand of all the corporate clients. So there are a few key messages I just wanted to leave with you. As I mentioned, sustainability is a very important topic forming part of our business strategies. Renewables actually form an indispensable element in delivering on our energy targets, environmental targets, and for that reason, Allianz is very, very supportive of all the initiatives happening here in Taiwan and the buildup of wind energy capacity. We also stand ready to invest in renewables and wind energy, and in fact, our group is now actively seeking to increase the geographic diversification of our renewable investments, also through opportunities in Asia. Clearly, it would be helpful if entry barriers would be further reduced and also regulation further streamlined to enhance the prospects of such investments. From our local perspective, our support of wind energy is unfortunately at the moment limited to pushing for green energy solutions from a pure corporate consumer perspective. We are pursuing the road of renewable energy certificates, but clearly we would love to see more green electricity options emerging so that we can really contribute more actively to the transformation of the energy market. Thank you very much for your attention. 谢谢.
Thank you, Dr. Oliver Wolgemuth. Please return to your seat. And lastly, let's welcome our final speaker for this morning. Please join me to welcome Head of New Markets, APAC of Siemens Gamesa, Mr. Gerhard Tschirschke.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gerrit Schirschke, heading the new market department of Siemens Gamesa. Shortly before going to Siemens Gamesa, what are we doing? We are actually the turbine supplier. So you see the beautiful 50 megawatt turbine on the top right, the latest turbine which we introduced. So we are building these turbines, we are deploying these turbines, we are a global market leader for these turbines. So more than 50% of all global offshore turbines are coming from Siemens Gamesa, from us produced. And we are very happy to be here in Taiwan because Taiwan really positioned itself as a front runner for Asia. Front runner for APEC by putting in clear government targets, 5.5 until 25, another 15 gigawatt until 2035, having a framework in place, a good system of feed-in tariff, converting into auction, and all of this gives us a lot of confidence and a lot of hope for the Taiwanese market, and therefore we made Taiwan our Asia home, you could say it like this, and I want to guide you through where we're standing right now for Taiwan and how we see the market. So Siemens Gamesa, so we are in Taiwan right now working on 3 gigawatts. 3 gigawatts is a portion out of the 5.5 gigawatts until 2025. These 3 gigawatts is a mix between projects which we have already in execution. This year is a very, very important execution year. Yunlin, Greater Changhua, Formosa 2, all 3 big projects which are in execution, which we are part of the execution, very important this year. We have another project to come with the Hailong project, which is in 25-26, another gigawatt project, very important for developing the supply chain. By now we are spread all across Taiwan. So by now we have a plant running in Taichung Harbor, the first nacelle factory which we actually set up outside of Europe. Show you a picture in a second, and we have more than 4 offices by now. So we are kind of spreading out, and you see the growth of offshore wind in Taiwan. You see it basically for ourselves. So we started small. We are close to 300 people by now. We will more than double in the next 2 years to come, with more productions to be set up. Just to give you a feeling from the ground, so what is happening in terms of supply chain. So this is a picture just taken last week. It's our factory actually in Taichung Harbor. So Taichung Harbor becomes the center for offshore wind in Taiwan. It's a key installation harbor where basically all installations or all project installation will be pursued from. We set up the first factory in Industrial Zone 2, a dedicated zone. And by now we are on a good swing of producing nacelles for the Greater Changhua project. So more than 40 nacelles are already produced. More to come, of course. And this is a good starting base for us to grow here into Taiwan. We made this step because it was connected to a clear pipeline, as part of the Greater Changhua project, and a clear outlook with round 2, round 3 in Taiwan. So this is how we made this step. Our goal is from here to grow further. So this footprint here is a starting step. We will more than double this footprint in the years to come. And then extension construction will start basically mid of this year after we are done producing for Greater Changhua. Local content is a major element of the policy in Taiwan. And of course, local content is two ways to look at it. It's challenging in the sense of building up local capabilities on a quicker path, but on the other hand, it's also an opportunity to build up new supply chain. We don't do this alone. So we have a strategy of looking at different ways of doing it. So we have a strategy of looking into new suppliers, like local to local, where we say, hey, here's a good supplier-based opportunity, let's work together. Examples like WARS and TECO, very capable local supply companies. Then there are other areas where we see the need of what the industry created in Europe for many years needs to be transferred to Taiwan, and then we go into a global to local approach, which is basically we connect global suppliers to set up a local footprint here, alone or as a joint venture. So KK Wind Solution is an example, Fasma ATEC, so FACT is an example, CS Wind, Xingfeng is an example, so basically our tower supplier. This is all established over the years, of the past. It's very important, it's still in development, so it's still an early step. So we start doing this now, or we started doing it for many years, but we continue doing it as part of the Hai Long project, and for the round 3, this will be the baseline to come. We have different steps looking at Taiwan, how we're going to do it. We can say from a strategic angle, yes, we anchored ourselves here. This happened, we have the footprint, we are very, very proud that we have a good starting point. The next step, which comes now, is basically expansion. As part of the round 2, round 3, our footprint will more than double, new elements will be localized, and our supplier base will be grown. We bring also the 50 megawatt turbine to Taiwan, and we basically today we produce the 8 megawatt, so there's a huge gap in between. So we do this also for the next round to come. Once we have this achieved, it's more about maturing. So because a lot is happening, new footprints, new production, new turbine, so many new. And of course, what happens is the industry needs to mature. So we need to be able, it's a very different story of producing 21 sets first time versus being a consistent long-term supplier. So here it's a lot about maturing, which happens as part of the round 3. So we're very much looking forward to round 3. It's a big opportunity to basically mature the supply chain. And lastly, what we want to achieve is also open up for export from Taiwan to other countries in APEC, to other regions, and bringing also new technologies. And Yufeng mentioned already floating, as also hydrogen. So there will be a lot of opportunities to come with the big and ambitious targets we are having here. And I just want to guide you a little bit also into floating and hydrogen, how we see it. So floating, if you look at potential studies about how many offshore wind gigawatt can be technically installed in Taiwan, you see around fixed bottom estimates around 70 to 80 gigawatts, floating above 400 gigawatts. So you see the difference in these potential studies. Same goes along for Japan, South Korea. Right now we are already we are actually very engaged in floating in several floating pilot projects, how we call it. One of the bigger pilot projects is basically the High Wind Tampen. It's an Equinor project, 88 megawatt, will be installed this year in Norway. And the Tetraspa, I saw it also in Yufeng's presentation, is another project which is one of the early pilot projects. The next step for floating will be to come from single pilots to a commercial scale. It's a reasonable commercial scale, so we are talking about 10, 20, 30 turbines upwards. It's right now, it's not helping too much of doing another 1 or 2 floater projects somewhere else in the world. So the proof of concept that this can work is actually existing. It's more about scaling up and getting costs down by scaling up. So this is kind of the next step, which we are looking forward to see to happen, hopefully from the mid of the decade onwards, and that we talk about floating projects which are more in the 200, 300 megawatt areas, and not about 1 or 2 floating projects, 1 or 2 floating turbines in a pilot project. Lastly, hydrogen. Just sharing a few elements what we are from Siemens Gamesa doing, which can become very interesting also long-term for Taiwan and other markets. We have a hydrogen test site running in Brande, where we basically connected 3 onshore turbines directly with the electrolyzer off-grid and producing hydrogen. Why this is very interesting for us, it basically shows how a off-grid connection works, so we can get independent without electricity feeding. The next step is basically on the right side it's a much bigger step. So right now we have a dedicated development project running, which has a goal to bring the hydrogen production directly next to an offshore turbine. And by that, you can actually produce hydrogen somewhere far out in the ocean, and you don't need a grid connection. So this is kind of the goal of it. By producing hydrogen directly at a TP, like a specialized TP yard in a standardized container solution. And by doing this, you basically reduce all cablings, and you have very different opportunities to utilize the hydrogen. So there are these are few examples which we are working on as well. Long term, it's the goal to bring all of this one or develop all of this one as part of our Taiwan growth story. We are very happy. We are very much looking forward to the next round 3 to come. A busy year, I think, for all the industry players. So thank you for having me, and that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gyho Cheshke. Please return to your seat. And now, our team will prepare the stage for our panel discussion. Please give us a few minutes to prepare the stage for the next section. I hope everyone has enjoyed the speech so far. I personally find them very informative. We've covered the content related to RE100 and about the offshore wind industry. Later, we will have more insightful and deeper discussion on this regard, and we will dive into the topics. Okay, let's welcome the following guests on stage. Firstly, the moderator for the panel discussion, Managing Director and of Counsel, Financial Services of PWC Taiwan, Eric Xin-Hong Lin. Senior Vice President of E.SUN Bank, Jason Chu. Editorial Division, ESG Managing Editor of Business Weekly, Ms. Wu Yuan-Guan. Country Manager of RWE Renewables Taiwan, Mr. Yu Feng Chong. Chief Financial Officer of Allianz, Dr. Oliver Wolgemuth. Head of New Markets, APAC of Siemens Gamesa, Mr. Gyho Cheshke.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Eric Lim from PWC. Again, thank you for taking the time to attend this event today. Just briefly, walk through. We heard from Flora in terms of the challenges that we are having with respect to RE100, and then Yufeng in terms of from the developer's perspective, and Jara in terms of the localization, and E.SUN and Oliver in terms of how to finance the transition. So I think no one is here to listen to me. So without further ado, I'll ask the first question to Flora. And the question is really, as we all know, Taiwan as the leading manufacturing hub in the region. And then given the Taiwanese government's commitment, how do we make sure that we can ensure we have sufficient renewable energy for the Taiwanese corporations?
Okay, I think first of all, I think the government should ease regulation, allow the SMEs to buy renewable electricity directly from solar PV or offshore wind companies through group buying or pre-order. Because many small and medium-sized enterprises say they can buy the renewable electricity. In fact, they can, but they just can buy the cheaper. Yeah, it's the problem. So compared with the big company like TSMC, small and medium company, they lack bargain power. And the big company always have more money and stronger bargaining power. Of course, they can buy the cheap electricity. So recently, a business group are also suggesting that government should make allocations based on the needs of different industries, because renewable electricity is limited. Cheap renewable electricity is rare. So business group believes that a big company will always have cheap electricity, and while the small company always get expensive one. So it's not fair. Because electricity is a limited source. People who use more, you should pay more and take more responsibility at the same time, right? So I think maybe it's a solution to, maybe governments should have to think about this suggestion. Yes.
Thank you to Flora, because I think from Business Week's perspective, you guys talk to, not only TSMC, the big corporates, but also the small to medium-sized enterprises in Taiwan. And I guess we don't have anyone from the government right now. So I guess I'm going to switch gear a little bit and ask a question to Oliver in terms of from the financial sector's perspective. We are seeing more and more banks and insurers involved in financing the transition, especially like the EU Green Deal. What do you see? Is there anything that can be done from the government side to further that transition?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is probably that investments in wind energy or renewables in general are bespoke bulk investments, which involve typically a very complex due diligence and implementation process. So even bigger financial institutions, struggling with investing in renewables because of the specific expertise that is needed. And of course, these opportunities always compete with other alternative investment opportunities. So even starting a process of investing into renewables comes down to a very basic cost-benefit analysis. And this is where also regulation comes in, and regulation becomes an additional consideration. I think in Taiwan, there are very good foundations in terms of regulation and incentives in investing into renewables. But from an investment insurance perspective, there might be two particular challenges. One of which is that there are provisions limiting the ownership of insurance firms to typically 45% in unlisted domestic companies and 20 to 25% for participations in private equity funds. And secondly, such investments typically require the pre-approval from the insurance regulator. And these two things obviously can create specific challenges. So the first thing is obviously they introduce a sort of uncertainty about the outcome of such an investment due diligence process, and that may be not helpful really when firms have to decide whether to put significant resources behind such a process. The other one is that it may also limit the investment efficiency because transaction costs obviously become a reasonably perhaps large fraction of the total investment volume, and that may make these investments less attractive compared to other investment opportunities where such restrictions do not exist. So what we would love to see, in particular in Taiwan, is the development towards a more principle-based regulation, less rules-based, less prescriptive. So I think what would be really helpful and important if frameworks were developed to set out the concepts for assessing the risks of such investments at the beginning and also through the operational stage. And then there's another aspect which is relevant, and Jason has mentioned this also in his speech. It's about the capital charge, so the risk capital that banks and also insurers have to hold for making such investments. In Taiwan, we had in 2018 a very positive development where the charge for investments through or carried out through the National Investment Agency and certain mutual funds were reduced, but obviously more can be done in terms of investments generally in unlisted domestic companies. So we would love to see an extension of that principle. And then we also need to look ahead. In 2025, insurance firms will adopt a new capital framework here in Taiwan called International Capital Standards. And there are similar considerations now in Europe going on as well in the context of the Solvency II reform, where regulators, policymakers really want to set better incentives for insurance firms to invest into renewables, wind energy, and potentially there is something to be copied, to be learned from, and worth having a look. And certainly important to build this consistency now from the current to this new future regime.
Thank you, Oliver. Just kind of summarize, I think I hear three key themes. Number one, like the regulations applicable to the insurers nowadays, like the cap on the PE funds. So obviously those were, put in place for different reasons, not to finance the transition to the renewable energy, right? And secondly, the principle base. Obviously, we know Taiwan is a civil law jurisdiction, but I think we are heading in that direction. And lastly, you mentioned about the risk-weighted capital for both banks and the insurers. And I think I can feel a little bit of that direction with the EU taxonomy. So maybe in the future, the financial sector will have better RWE for financing green investments versus, say, not so green investments. So thank you, Oliver. And I guess since we are on the financing side, I'm going to move to Jason. From the bank's perspective, as you mentioned, E.SUN is definitely a leader in Taiwan. You guys committed to PCAF, to SBTI, and then have participated in so many projects. So maybe you can share with us, what has been the lessons learned for E.SUN in doing the transition or supporting the transition, and what additional steps that Taiwan can consider to further that aspiration.
Okay, thank you. I think E.SUN is one of the most active banks in the green financing. We just issued a green bond and green loan with our clients, and we also very actively to participate in the project finance. Normally, Taiwanese commercial banks, they don't have the appetite of this kind of project financing because the long tenor and complex structures. So we got the experience that I think if Taiwanese bank would like to join the green finance area, you have to prepare for such a long time. You need to prepare your knowledge on the oil industry, and also the lending structure you have to learn from the global banks, especially the project finance banks. And also you have to fine-tune your organization, just like E.SUN. We just to create some new project finance department, and that we can just focus on this kind of type of the financing that even the credit department or the other like the RM team, they are not very familiar with this type of the financing. So I think it takes some time for a traditional bank to join this financing market. And on the other side, that we see that there is some innovation in the finance market, just like we are working with our clients to create the ESG-linked products to help our customers. They can just meet their goals to reduce the carbon emission, because the carbon emission may be a major impact or issue for our companies, especially when they are facing the globalization. So if you like to export to the Europe, so you have to follow these rules. So we would like to use this kind of product to help our customers that to set up their goals to reduce the carbon emission. This is a good preparation for that next step to for the globalization. So I think the bank is the partner with our clients. So our service is also created for our clients' requirements. So facing the RE100 requirements and the global change, we will just work together with our client to see is there any product that suitable for them. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason. Just I think I hear two key considerations. One, I mean, every for Taiwanese banks, you know, we need to have the tone from the top, you know, to have the governance and to have a specialized team, you know, getting all departments involved in order to be able to work with the international banks to, you know, to do the project financing for the offshore wind funds. And I think the second consideration you mentioned, it's around, I think it's sustainable related products, like sustainable loans, bonds. So it's really for the financial sector to work with your clients to help them to adapt to the new world. So thank you, Jason. And then I guess we're going to move, you know, from the financing sector to the real economy. So I'm going to ask you for a question in terms of, I guess I was very impressed with RWE, you know, moving from a coal electricity company to a renewable energy with over a century, you know, of history. So, and then now you are committed to invest in Taiwan. So I guess from your perspective, you know, as you assess your business strategy in Taiwan, how would you like work with the Taiwanese corporates to like help them, also helping them to procure renewable energies? I mean, when we talk about the feed-in tariff, are we like looking at corporate PPA in that direction?
Yeah. Well, in Taiwan, yeah, the company in phase 2, it was by feed-in tariffs, and that is still an option. But currently, there for phase 3, the proposed rules puts a cap at 2.49 NT per megawatt hour, per kilowatt. So naturally, as a developer, us and others are looking at all different ways of increasing revenue streams. I think there's a key thing here, which is earlier it was meant. There's been a lot of talk about SMEs, about about the supply chain here in Taiwan. Their goal is to get renewable electricity. How can they do this? And the key thing they can do to prove it is through that the TREC, the Taiwan Renewable Energy Certificate. And there are a few different ways there, some of which they can do themselves, some of which are working together, striking contracts with developers and renewable energy producers such as ourselves. So one way which they can hit renewable energy targets is through self-generation, installing their own, for example, solar panels. And this is why we see solar being the key driver for 2025 targets from the government, because we've seen throughout Europe and Germany, it's not just utility scale developments which make a difference. It's also bottom up. It's from every company, every household installing renewable energy. And then there's from the Renewable Energy Act and also the Electricity Amendment Act, there allows mechanisms for companies to then get green electricity. So, for example, if you've installed renewable energy and you have an excess of T-RECs, you can actually sell them. So actually there's a way for companies, SMEs, to then procure these excess T-RECs from other companies. And then Taiwan has set up a national renewable energy certification center to ensure that these are valid, and they can use this to prove to the upstream supply chain that they are sourcing this green electricity. Now, you've mentioned as well there's an avenue whereby companies can strike corporate PPAs, large offtake contracts with renewable energy developers, so with renewable energy wind farms. This has been in the news. We've seen the likes of TSMC do this in the past couple of years. And I mean, it is true. Large companies have got much more bargaining power, because ultimately, when it comes to financing of an offshore wind farm, these are big, complex, and expensive contracts. I'll give you an example of the contract size. If you're a small developer, if you're a small company, you have, let's say, under regulations, if you're over 5 megawatts of peak demand, you need to get 10% of your electricity from renewables. So that's rough. If you're going to strike a contract for this for per year, that's around 10 million NT in terms of the contract value. That's per year. If it's over a 20-year lifetime, then that's 200 million NT. Now, if you're, let's say, a 100 megawatt user and you're aiming to be completely green, so 100% renewables, 100 megawatts, that's a 2 billion NT contract per year. Times that as a 20-year contract. These contracts are huge, and so to negotiate them properly, you need a team of lawyers, you need a team of accountants, a team of bankers. It's not easy, and so it does actually make it much more difficult for SMEs to enter into this, because to do the due diligence, to negotiate well, it's not easy. So there is an alternative route which the government has set up, which is energy retailers. I mentioned since 2016, you can now buy your electricity from beyond TPC, beyond Taipower. You can, and we've seen that there are over 10 new retail companies which procure electricity and then sell it on to end users. And what we need to see is government and industry working closely together to deregulate it, to actually enable these retailers to procure electricity. And then small SMEs can then go to these retailers, and they're not looking for 500 megawatts. They may need 5, they may need 10. And this route is really important to allow those SMEs to access this market. Because ultimately, as a developer of the project, we need to make sure our projects are bankable. And key things that means the lenders are going to want to see, have you secured your revenue streams? Have you got a 20-year plus offtake agreement? How's the credit risk of the offtaker? So all these are really important coming together. And so more work is required. And so we want to see government, TPC, industry, banks, the entire supply chain is required to make this happen.
Thank you, Yufeng. So I just kind of summarize what I hear. One, I think it's self-help, right? Because I mean, if you're a corporate, then if you can do solar, you should do it. And now I'm thinking about my own apartment. Maybe our building should have a solar panel on the roof, right? And two, the certificates. And three, you highlighted the difficulty for SMEs to do a corporate PPA. I mean, they're not going to hire teams of lawyers and bankers and accountants to, structure a deal for 10 million, 20 years, right? So the resellers, and I think this echoes what Flora mentioned earlier from your interviews with the SMEs. This is definitely something that the government, the industry, and the industry meaning the resellers or the electricity industry, and the SMEs should continue to work on that. Then I guess I'm going to ask Gerard the next question. Let me focus on the positive. So obviously Siemens Gamesa, it's a global leader for wind turbines, and as a non-tech person, I'm always amazed how you guys do it. And then last year, you invested in the first offshore facility in Taichung, and that's the first nacelle assembly facility outside of Europe. So as a Taiwanese, I thank you. But then I guess, the difficulty must be, or the challenges must be working with the local contents requirements. So maybe you can share with, your thoughts on, how, in terms of, making sure that we have a local supply chain here in Taiwan.
Yeah, it works. You mentioned it correctly. So we're actually quite proud of the step we took. So we acquired the land 2017, I think, already, and then we had 2 years of construction, running 1 year now of full production, and it was for us a very, very good learning. Round 2 was a clear framework, right? So there was a feed-in tariff for developers, and also combined with like a clear request, demand, mandatory content, local content, which has to be created in Taiwan. So it was a quite clear framework. How we did it basically is we combined it with like, we call it like anchor projects, so saying which are projects which we can basically support investments from our side. We set up a production facility in Taichung Harbor, and then we went into the screening of the supply chain in terms of, okay, what are the capabilities the supply chain have, what is existing in Taiwan, and what has to be brought to Taiwan. And we have like different ways of looking at this. So the first one is basically where we see high capabilities of the supply chain in Taiwan. We have like, we call a local to local approach. So we basically qualify a new local supplier who first time deliver for a local project. Yeah, so Swanco Resin is a good example. First time Swanco, we qualified them, first delivery into Formosa 1 phase 2 project. It's a local to local approach. Then also have to be realistic. There are elements which are really hard to do for just ramping up in such a short time frame, a completely new supplier who has no experience. So for example, tower supply. For tower, we have chosen different. We have chosen like a global to local approach, which means we used a global supplier like CS Wind, who combined with Xingfeng, a local company in Taichung Harbor, setting up a tower factory, and then delivering on time into the project in round 2. So it's a global to local approach. And finally, we do this with the overarching goal. In the end, we are always qualifying supplier on a global base. So once you are a supplier of Siemens Gamesa in Taiwan, you basically have access to the entire global Siemens Gamesa portfolio. You are basically, we are not changing standards or qualities for specific markets. So once you are in, you are basically a global supplier. So this is how it went for round 2. Round 3, I think, will be very interesting in that sense because the localization requirements remained or even increased in areas. There's some more flexibility on threshold of percentage, but they are there. And the feed-in tariff is basically gone. So it will be a very interesting mix. The good thing is we are building on a lot of projects already from round 2, and we are basically extending, so we are not building new. So there's a positive side of it, but it remains a challenge. And the more requirements you put out, the more flexibility you take out of the system, the harder it gets on the cost side, to be very honest.
Yeah, when I first got into this, I look at one of our PWC Europe report, and I think the European experience started with respect to offshore wind maybe about maybe a little bit over a decade ago, 15 years, and then the title of the PWC report is that phasing out FIT, and that was from 2019, 2018. So, to some degree, I say, for Taiwan, we managed to, enter phase 3 in a much relatively shorter time period, but that's a delicate balance, right? And so thank you for sharing the phase 2 experience, the local to local, and the challenge that we will be facing for phase 3. I guess, thank you, Gerard. And we're moving back to the financial sector. So, Oliver, I guess this is more like a forecasting question. So as we continue to search for new opportunities and new ways to collaborate, what can you expect, in terms of investments?
Yeah, I think there are probably three avenues to that. The first one is the collaboration within the financial services industry, namely between life insurers and asset managers. I think it's fair to say that there is an increasing desire of life insurers to offer sustainable products beyond microinsurance, really targeting now the mass market with sustainable investment products, products where policyholders can choose the underlying fund. And life insurers are now collaborating with fund managers to develop basically the underlying vehicles to make them ESG compliant. And that is also driven in part, we have to say, by the policyholders, the consumers themselves, because they detect there is an increasing evidence between investment performance and companies actually applying sustainable principles. The second area of collaboration between insurance firms and corporates is from an investment and a procurement perspective. So life insurers are obviously large bulk investors, and now across the industry we try to reduce the carbon footprint of our investment portfolio, and sustainable principles really become a key driver for investment decisions or keeping invested. And the same holds now also for procurement, so for purchasing goods and services for our domestic companies, where, you know, amongst others now sustainable principles become a key decision factor. And I personally think that especially the SMEs in this country can greatly leverage from the expertise that financial services firms have built up on these topics over the last number of years. Jason was mentioning how long this is done in E.SUN Bank, and in Allianz we have a similar long history. So, you know, taking some of the frameworks and concepts and building them into business practices and then really leverage them for creating more business makes perfectly sense. And the last aspect is probably beyond our pure business focus, more driven by the insight that sustainability is something we as an industry, as a business community, have to push forward. And I think there are more and more firms coming together to engage with industry bodies, with associations, with government agencies to define and shape sustainable policies and making sure that they are connected to the business environment. So I think Jason and me being here is probably an evidence of that fact.
Thank you, Oliver. So maybe Jason, from your perspective, in terms of the, you know, from a bank perspective, you mentioned about sustainable loans, bonds. Are we looking at mortgages, credit cards, new investments opportunities, or financial products? Just to get your thoughts on that as well.
Yes, I think the ESG issue is more and more important for our business operations. Even we just issue a credit card, we need to check if it is the zero carbon emission. So this year we just got the notice from the our target approval from the SBT. Yeah, just because we just decided that we have to be the first financial holdings that we can just relocate our assets from the high carbon emission industry to the lower ones. So we just joined the SBT. That means that we not only have to focus on the category 1, that the usage of energy of ourselves will use 100% the renewable energy. And also we have to take care of our clients, because we have to share their carbon emission portions on our bank book if we just lend into this type of industries. So I think the next step we will discuss with our clients that to help them to set up their goals for the carbon emission target. And then we can just tailor-made, I think we just mentioned the ESG loan with them, that to, if once they can just reach their goals, and then we can just give them some interest margin improvement for the incentives to encourage our clients and can work together with us to find out the way to, I mean, this is also a way for them to lower their risk of management because they are facing the global competition. So if they do not do this kind of, we just mentioned that the transforming into the green development or the green manufacturing, and then they will now they will risk the damage that maybe one day they cannot just lend the money from the banks, because we do not like to lend to this kind of industry at all. So I think for the long term, green issue will be more and more important. So we will work together with our clients to develop the suitable product for them, and we will work together to make this environment better. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Just I guess a couple of thoughts just to echo what Oliver and Jason mentioned. For the audience who may not be that familiar with SBTI, which stands for Science-Based Target Initiative, and it's basically just for the companies or financial institutions who have committed to SBTI to reduce their carbon emission. The way I think about it is I need to be on diet, and I need to get rid of 5 kilograms in 5 years and 10 kilograms in 10 years, and I need to set my targets. So, and for financial institution, obviously, Scope 3 emissions will be the highest. So it's obviously a challenge for the financial institutions to work with their clients. Here, I do want to emphasize, because I specialize in financial services, people think about, does that mean you're going to not lend money to certain corporates and then more money to certain corporates? That's not how I think about it. Because the carbon intensity industries will need guidance. They will need to make more capital expenditures or CapEx to, say, invest in hydrogen, as Jiro mentioned earlier, the new technologies. So those are actually opportunities for Allianz, for E.SUN Bank, to help engage their clients to make that transition. So I think in terms of opportunities, so just want to emphasize that. Now I'm going to move to like the real sector again, right? So as Yun Feng and Jera mentioned earlier, the Taiwanese government has this aspiration to become, the renewable energy hub for Asia Pacific. And obviously, as we all know, the local content requirement is really to build up our local partners or your local partners. What could you suggest to Taiwan in terms, how RWE, Siemens Gamesa, and your local partners can continue to work on to meet that aspiration?
Well, what we've seen from, if you look at the examples from Europe, the industry was growing there, and if you see the suppliers here, I mean, there's heavy industry in terms of Siemens, but also a lot of skills, a lot of IP, a lot of technologies. And in the Asia-Pacific region, it is competitive. Taiwan, whether it's semiconductors or offshore wind, is competing against the other countries, so Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia. And one way Taiwan can stay ahead is through IP, through technology. Taiwan has really good engineers, and we've seen this, and this is one reason why the semiconductor industry has been really successful here. And in the offshore wind sector, there are lots of opportunities. It's not just about turbines, which are fundamental and foundations. There are lots of small niche areas as well. And we see globally there are companies which, they have a small niche. They provide one service, but they provide the service in almost every single wind farm across the world. And that's something which Taiwan can also do. Taiwan companies, and not just the big corporations, but small startups. And we mentioned SMEs. These companies can play a role here in Taiwan, getting a foot in with the Taiwan projects, pitching their ideas, and then joining the regional and then global supply chain. So I'd say, yeah, it's competitive. Where does Taiwan have its strengths? Is it in terms of low-cost industries, or is it about the high-tech engineering?
Yeah, just adding to this, I think Taiwan clearly has an advantage of being a front runner, right? So in APEC, a committed offshore wind pipeline, except mainland China, Taiwan is clearly ahead. So clearly ahead of Japan, South Korea, Vietnam. Other countries are picking up, but Taiwan is ahead. So there's, I think, a huge opportunity, let's say it like this. I'm also a little bit involved in sales project in other markets, and basically we look at, there are two things. So one thing is we need to ensure the turbine which we can offer is always the newest technology. So there needs to be a way that we integrate in the system that we can always apply and produce the newest technology here in Taiwan. It can become a challenge if you later on think about new generation turbines, mandatory localization requirements. You usually have prototype suppliers who are doing it the first time. So this could become a challenge long term. We need to ensure to find a system that it's always the newest technology produced turbine here in Taiwan. This is the one element. Second is it's about cost and competitiveness. A project, when we want to sell a project in South Korea or Japan, nobody will pay it's actually the other way around. Nobody will pay a premium for a Taiwanese turbine. It's the other way around. They would be paid a premium if you have more local content produced out of Japan, for example. So basically, we need to achieve a system again to be cost competitive, to basically create an advantage by bringing over a turbine from Taiwan. And here are, I think, very concrete initiatives where also we know the Taiwanese government is also working on support on infrastructure. Taichung Harbor is the production harbor for all of, at least on the turbine side, for our turbines. There are major infrastructure challenges which we see in Taichung Harbor, and there are major investments which need to be taken to develop quaysides, to develop export opportunities, and these needs to go into the long-term plans of the government, of TIPC, and whoever is responsible on this one to make basically to make the way, path the way to enable these export opportunities also on the competitive side.
Right, so I hear strength and I hear challenges, right? So the strength is we have the local talents, we have the engineers, we have the talents and the creativity. But then in terms of, when we want to go outside of Taiwan, then, we are not local content from their perspective, right? So we need to be, competitive in terms of pricing. That being said, nothing is without challenges, right? So I'm pretty proud that, Taiwan is taking, the first mover advantage here. And just going back to Jason on E.SUN, SBTI, the last time I checked their list, I see E.SUN's name on it. And for example, usually we look to the US for leadership, right? Just for your information, if you look at SBTI's list, I don't see any US banks, right? So I guess, we are down to the last couple minutes. I guess before we close the panel for this morning, just, any final thoughts, from any of, the panelists?
Just think about the theme of today. It's about embracing RE100 with offshore wind, and it's once again, it's the entire supply chain. It's about creating the access for the supply chain to tap into low carbon renewable energy, and this offshore wind's going to play a major role in this. Also, the new technologies we've said coming up, such as hydrogen, which are going to help to create green certificates for energy-intensive sectors which are not electrified. This requires, we have made the first steps in Taiwan, but further steps are required, even further input from the government. We talked about over-regulation, We've talked about TIPC infrastructure upgrades. We've talked about those energy retailers. There are still lots of challenges ahead, but the direction, the trajectory is there. I think the key thing is whether it can be done in time to meet the targets. So, yeah, but I think the future is promising.
Yeah, I think for us, we are still at the beginning of the story, right? So we are still at the beginning of the story. For now, we have a few 100 megawatt offshore wind installed so far. They are big targets, but we are at the beginning of the story. And I think this is what we need to realize there's still a long way to go to where we want to be with the targets. And it can be a very, it should be, and it hopefully will develop a very positive long-term story, but we need to manage the challenge on the way. I think the path is very promising, and we really look forward to the path going forward. But we need to be also make sure that the industry now delivers and can deliver, sets a boundary condition that the industry can deliver to achieve these targets. Yeah. And then I think we are on a very good path.
Right. I guess, if we look at semiconductor, Taiwan is definitely ingrained, in that supply chain. We are indispensable. And the FIT regime, get us started. And we have Allianz, we have E.SUN, and we have all the industry players. Let's keep that momentum going, and hopefully we will be ingrained in the global Asia-Pacific supply chain for renewable energies. Any parting thoughts? Okay. I guess, let's, give a round of applause to the panelists. And I thank the audience for your attention. And then I think we have some coffee and desserts for everyone to kind of mingle after this section. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for our panel members and our moderator for the great discussion. Please remain on the stage. And I'm sure our audience also find it very insightful. So to wrap up the morning section, let's take a group photo of the moderator and the panelists. And I would also like to invite David Chiang, the representative of German Offshore-Wind Initiative in Taiwan, to join the group photo. 现场的摄影师和媒体请就定位，我们即将进行大合照。Ready? 3, 2, 1. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attendance this morning at the German Offshore-Wind Initiative Summit, where we have discussed how we can embrace RE100 with offshore wind. If you have also registered for the afternoon section, where we will be discussing building and strengthening local offshore wind industry chain, please ensure to return back to the venue by 1:30. We have prepared some refreshment at the corridor. Please feel free to network with our speakers and other participants. Thank you very much and see you in the afternoon.